Okay, hi everyone. We are back for another software design session. This is, I seem to have been doing a lot of live streaming this afternoon, rather different topics. This is now language completeness and consistency, looking at a variety of assorted topics here. Always fun to see what comes up. All right, let's look first at the import-export framework updates. How to set default values for various properties, formats, options. Okay, so what is the basic thing?
Right.
Element getters, setters, options getters, setters. That's the essence of that.
So give me a
Right. So okay. So we have a few sets of right. So for a given format, right, there are, right, it may have one or more various options that you might want to change the defaults for, rather than having every single import call manually set it, which we have currently no mechanism for. But there are also some non-option type properties that you might want to set. And I think in the what's needed, which is misspelled, the what's need section, I have a listing of some of these things.
All right.
Oh, right, like extensions, MIME types. And so there was some idea.
I'm sorry, that's a different idea. So there's a couple of different things here. So first of all, in an import-export call, there are elements you can request, and there's a question of which are the default elements.
Right.
That's point one. Point two, there are options to import and export, which are relevant for a particular import or export type, which you could also set, which you can in principle set globally for import export, but that's probably a bad idea. You probably want to set them on a per type.
No, they're not options to import or export. Options of import or export is an empty list. Various formats may have options.
Okay, fine. But I mean, they are structurally presented as options to import export. They're not treated that way. It's a hack, basically.
Correct. At the end, when you read the code, it's an option in the import call or export call.
Mm-hmm. Right, but it isn't treated as a global option to import and export.
Correct. It's a format-specific one. And in fact, it's in many cases, it's an element-specific option.
Okay. Now, do we also have cases where within the element structure, we give option-like things? Is that a thing or not? Like for the method option?
No.
Okay, we do that for method. I mean, completely different world here, but for method options, we are doing that, right?
Right. Right. And so there was one idea labeled alternative one to sort of hack up options, but that has various drawbacks. So the other is to have sort of dedicated functions which handle both the format specific options or element specific options, as the case may be, and sort of the more global type properties of like, what file extensions should I consider?
Right, let me just zoom out a little bit here. Okay, so there's also the question of what should import by default. You know, if you define CSVX, should that be registered as a thing that import should use the CSV mechanism for, right?
Right. I believe that is what the extensions file format property that's listed there is referring to.
Okay.
Right, maybe set append in the future. So I guess we don't have that set up, but it's certainly something users want to know.
Okay. So the first point is, what you're saying is, we want a global mechanism that allows to my mind, the kind of thing I would think about doing is something more like having a symbol look, having something like dollar import options or something, just like we have dollar import formats, right? If we had a dollar import options, which is a structure that's some kind of association or even entity store or something, which says, you know, CSV goes to, or maybe I don't know exactly how this works, but something like this, because we do want something where you can just see what have I set. So I'm saying, because normally for a function where there are options that you're set optioning, you could just say options of the function, you'd see what you set.
Well, no, you can't see what you set. You can see what the global, you can see the union of what was the global default and what you have manually.
Oh yeah, okay, fine. Fair enough. Fair point. But roughly you can do that. So what I would propose is that it's something like there's a global symbol, dollar import options, and that is a big association that contains all kinds of information like this.
What about the model of system options? We have set system options to show the whole thing.
Yes, I think that isn't a bad model. I mean, that's the type of thing where we have where we'd have set import options and so on.
Okay, so I think that's essentially a version of what the set, what's listed as alternative 2 down below as set file format properties and set file format properties. And maybe we do want to split it as import options.
Well, I'm not sure about that, but okay, so your idea here is that we have a concept of a file format properties.
Right, and presumably
this doesn't seem bad.
Yeah.
And a set file format properties, where presumably
Anytime was right. It would be nice to have an append for certain things, but that doesn't apply to everything. Like you wouldn't append to import options, but you do want to append to like extensions and MIME types.
Okay.
Yeah. Right, but you can always do that manually, right? You can just set it to the join
Correct.
of the current value or the append of the current value and
Yeah, you could.
Okay. So the idea would be, go ahead, let me just understand.
Yeah, so I think, so since we seem to be in general agreement that having sort of a getter and setter function would be desirable, I guess the question is, do we want one for both import and export or separate ones for import and export? And the second question is naming.
Right, but I mean, I think the concept of a single one, because I can imagine you wanting to bank switch somehow. But I think there's another point, which is like system options, you should be able to disgorge all the default option values. See what I'm saying? I'm not sure why these aren't associations as well. They should. What I'm saying here is, if I say file format properties open close, I should get a giant association.
I think that's fine. Yes.
Of all these things with all the defaults and all these kinds of things. Right?
Yep. And keep in mind that there are properties like extensions and MIME types that are not connected specifically to import or export. It's really both. I don't think the separation makes sense.
Right. We set those things in file format right now. And I guess if we did this and we had one giant association, I could move them from file format to live in this new thing.
Yep. That's what I would do.
So
and then
let me throw one potential wrinkle. So we certainly have one. So are we talking that we would have fields import options and export options? Because certainly we've had, right, we have cases like character encoding where the default for import is different from the default for export.
Fine. Yeah, fine. I'm sure there are many.
Well, those would be separated.
Yeah, I'm sure that many things have different import options and export options.
So one problem with this giant association thing is we don't necessarily load things like the converter's options until the converter is run for the first time.
Tough luck. Do it differently.
Okay.
Cache them. Okay, but let's look here at how to associate I mean, you're saying this is our name for the thing. Now, sometimes we have multiple our names for things, don't we?
Yes.
Very few cases, but yes, like JPEG and JPEG and JPG.
Okay, well, we'll have to just canonicalize that. If you do a set.
Yeah, I think
this function, if you would put JPEG or JPG in there, it'll work. We can canonicalize first.
But then $import formats, $export formats just report one.
Okay,
and that's the canonical form that is documented as well.
So you propose file format properties. Not obviously wrong. What does the file format function exactly do? It just tells you the format. It's at find file
guesses. Format. It tries to guess what the format is.
It's file format.
It's just file. Yeah. Yeah.
That's weird.
Yeah.
It's so stupid. Could you report that as a bug in the search system?
Yep, I got it.
I wish this was find file format. Okay. That should surely be a failure.
Another thing we have discussed in import-export in general, a lot of import calls return $failed, and that's, I think, one of the very few cases around our system that returns $failed, not a failure.
We should return
well, it didn't fail here, it just didn't find it in the list.
This one didn't find it, right?
Right, a failure in file format would be like if the file doesn't exist or something.
Or that it's just garbage.
I disagree. I mean,
well, if it's garbage, then it ends up saying that it's text or binary.
Okay. Okay.
I mean,
but here I agree with Sean. None here is probably fine because it says it's none of CSV or TSV.
Yeah, fine. Itai, you were saying something.
Right. I was basically right. The failure indicates that something failed, and here you asked the question, which of these is it, and it answered none. So I think it's correct that this is not a failure.
That's okay. All right, but the question of whether we change $failed to a failure object for import export is an interesting one, because there must be a lot of code that depends on $failed.
Yeah, I would worry about the side effects of that.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. Well, it may be that what we have to do is introduce an option for failure. I don't know whether we have that in other places, some kind of failure result option that we can allow people to set it to give failure objects now. We'd
probably want a global $default variable or something.
Oh, that's horrifying. No, people will just get that wrong all the time.
In query, we have a failure action option.
Okay. Which
well, I'd like this failure action thing if we had some way to set the thing globally.
Look, the whole point is we're just sneaking it in right now. Gradually, it will become more and more, assuming that that's what people want, it will become more and more of a, you can always do it with set options. Right? And I think it's
you can't because of how options works for import. Right? The reason import as a function does have import level options, but we can't report them because then other options to converters will appear red. And that's apparently not an easy problem to fix.
Okay, that's an implementation issue. We're not going to have that wag, that hair on the tail of the dog wag the whole dog. Okay. That's something turning red in the syntax color is not a reason to change the design. So, my feeling is somehow we should try and make a bridge to being able to get import to return failure objects, although we cannot just, make it happen immediately. So, that's a question for how we are not going to have a global variable. No way. Right?
Fine. Well, maybe we can actually fix this problem with the syntax coloring once we have file format properties anyway.
Yeah,
that's the best way
right,
to do
because
it.
then we'll actually have an explicit list, and there'll be just logic you can pick up from that.
Yeah.
Well, it's easy enough to just
problem.
turn off the red coloring for any options, but then, right, if you say foo, it won't be colored red. But
yeah, okay. Let's worry about that. That seems to me like a hair on the tail type question. Okay, Nick is pointing out on our live stream, what about setting options for multiple formats, like both CSV and TSV at the same time? Well, I could, blah, blah, blah. The real question is.
Well, I think what we would, there was some discussion, and maybe I just failed to include it in this agenda of, having like import groups. So like, right, there's like table ones that.
Yeah. Well, you could just have a list.
Right. And then
if the first argument.
Right. But I'm also right. If you want to manually create the list, great. But if you also want, all tabular guys, it might be nice if they have some way to programmatically set.
Well, and it might be a reasonable thing to say tabular format, and that might just look at the specific format of a file and decide that it's going to be, decide you want tabular. I don't know whether there are ambiguities in any case, but
I don't think this is useful. I think that across categories, they're still going to have pretty different options. CSV and Excel have very different options.
All right. Okay. I prefer a set file format properties rather than this.
Yeah, I agree with the point that Sean made in general about Excel versus CSV, but on the other hand, I do think there might be certain special named groups that make sense, like raster 2D image, right? There are a bunch.
Or the video formats, for example.
Right, there are a bunch of shared options, and maybe you can't set every single option that way, but.
Well, those formats already live behind dollar variables anyway.
I see. But then
there's no problem with putting a list in the first argument.
Okay,
that's totally fine. But those things are different, though. The set file format properties is different than the equals, because the equals one is similar to options equals.
Yeah, we're not going to make that work. We're not going to make that work. This set, I think this is going to be more of a, you're saying this is a blow everything away and set it type thing, like options.
Yes. And set file format property says for this session, use this as the new default instead.
Right, so we might even need both, just like we do for options in principle.
Right, at least I need that internally for, and we want to document it anyway if users create their own formats.
Yes, that's a good point. I don't know what.
And this is also good for encouraging users to create their own formats, because now they can set things like extensions and MIME types, and it'll actually work like import does.
Okay, how will that work, the extensions and MIME type things? So for a given thing, what happens if 7 different things claim .foo as their, as a MIME type for themselves?
I guess the ordering does matter in that thing. We have internal ordering, and I have internal functions that, reorder things and say, make this the highest priority.
Okay, but how would a user do that?
That's a good question. I'm not sure.
Well, the alternative thing to do would be to have, in this first argument, since we're doing, maybe this is the wrong thing, but I could imagine something, maybe this is too crazy, that what you do is a way of setting a MIME type, like CSV arrow CSV or something, that the first argument could somehow be a MIME type specifier. a MIME type mapping thing. That this would be a way of saying, I want this MIME type. I don't know whether that helps us. Yes, it does.
It doesn't.
Yes, it does, because it tells one, it says, look, what we're trying to do is associate a MIME type with something. I mean, look, maybe we should just bite the bullet and say, set MIME type.
Why not set file format properties CSV, MIME type?
Because then you don't know, given that you have, look, let me call this foo, okay? Which format does foo go to first? Do you get what I'm saying?
Mm-hmm.
I don't see how this answers that question.
It doesn't.
Yeah.
It doesn't. I proposed it, but it does not answer that question. So what I'm saying is, maybe we could say set file, register file extension. This isn't the right thing, but
okay, you would only ever care if the only thing that matters is that the one that you want to hit is the first thing in the list. This could just be an option to set file format properties like precedence or something.
Ugh.
I was thinking that, but what would be the value of precedence?
A number, 100, and then you make a bigger number, 10 to the 5. Somebody else, I'm going to be bigger than you, 10 to the 10.
Well, I'll just set my precedence to infinity, and then
then you're
or 2 to the 63rd minus 1, depending on which one is more effective.
Right. I mean, it's
really a binary flag.
It's a theological flag. In Itai's version, it's theological. Okay. In any case, I think there's a slight argument for something like this. I think if we had a structure that showed you these names are interpreted this way. I mean, okay, for me, on my computer, it drives me absolutely up the wall that the registration of things like, .m, whatever, it's like I've got many applications that could grab that. And it's a big pain trying to edit the registry to change what application should grab that file extension. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah. I still think that the file extensions and MIME types happily live in file format properties. That separating it out to a different function, as far as I can tell, has no advantages right now.
Well, except that it allows you to do the exact thing that I always want to do. Let me just point out, I don't know whether you guys find this.
Couldn't we just adopt the rule that, if you set the file extension or file extensions, then those are added to the front of the list, so they become the default?
I understand all those rules, okay? I'm going to just tell you the operational fact that I don't know whether you guys have this experience. Maybe I use a wider range of different kinds of software and this and that and the other. It drives me up the frigging wall that, I keep on, how do you set, it's a messy, setting a .nb file to be opened by this version of Wolfram Desktop. It's a big pain. Now, maybe that's not a comparable thing. Maybe it's a different issue. But do you get what I'm saying? I mean,
I've given up. I just open the program first and then pick the file from the menu.
Okay, but that's not a good answer, right? I mean, there's a way of doing it.
I'm saying I agree. I hear your pain.
But are you saying you want to open a specific file or all .nb files?
No, all .nb files typically. I'm like, that's what this is the thing. I'm going to change it over to be the latest version of Wolfram Desktop, whatever it is. I'm going to, no, I don't want to open a .m file as an Objective-C file, right?
Right. Well, you right click and you say always open with, right?
Yes, I know that, except that it doesn't always take, and it's always kind of confused, and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. It sometimes reverts later.
And it's even gotten worse. It's gotten worse rather than better in the last couple of versions of Mac OS. So right,
okay, but anyway, so we're trying to get out of that box. So what I'm suggesting is that perhaps we should just have a table that is, basically dollar file extensions or something that, let's see. I mean, one thing we could do is just a dollar file extensions that is just the list, that is just a bunch of replacement rules, or dollar file extension rules.
Sean, what's the existing variable, right? Surely we have some variable which contains this information, do we not?
We have getters and setters internally in the import-export context.
But we don't, well, yes, I'm talking about internal things, but we don't have something that will just give us all the file associations goes to, or format goes to file associations, which way do we
this way. This is the way we want it, I think. The question, there's a different
one extension
thing.
To format.
No, look. Yep. What we want here for export, it is a perfectly happy property that if you're creating a file, no, what am I saying? Yes, yeah, this is what you want. There's two things. If you create a file and you're told it should be a CSV file or told it should be a JPEG, okay? There is an option probably to, no, actually you don't even need that option because you're going to give the extension the name of the file. So this is the way around.
No. I mean, you have the issue on both, right? If you export with just with just a file name and not with a format, then it will happily.
Yeah, I know, but that's the same way around. That's a conversion from a file extension to a format type.
Right.
There's no case where you are given a format type and it says make up a file name. You see what I'm saying? So it doesn't need to know. We could have that. It will be a useful thing probably to have.
I think that things like that have been sort of requested for like create file when you want to create a placeholder first and then write to it.
I see. Okay, fine. So then there could be a format, but that can be a property in the file format properties. That can be a property of that file format. Okay, let me. So I think the file extension rules is a sensible idea. Okay, so
I just put a couple of things in chat. We already do have some internal symbols.
All right, fine. Nick is suggesting on our live stream an interesting point, well, implicitly, which is what about entities for these things? Is there a possibility, and maybe this is a bad idea because we don't typically do this, we don't typically have settable properties for entities.
Yep.
But it is the case that we do have a CSV entity, don't we? Do you understand what I'm saying?
I am not maybe Jeremy knows. I don't know the answer to that.
Yeah, well, I mean, we certainly should have. I mean, if let's try an obscure format. Well, let's just try CSV. File format. There we go. It's a file format, right? So if I say
properties.
Okay. Oh, for goodness sake. We should add, this is a stupid problem. We should add, our other Wolfram language systems. Just say Wolfram language there. That makes sense? Yes, does somebody have that?
Yeah,
about it. Okay, so
I can grab that.
Yes, thank you. So there is an entity here, and we should make sure that that entity, I mean, arguably, for example, some of the information that we have, I don't know whether we want to mix this, the sort of the real world, what's CSV out there in the world versus what do we have for CSV? Do you understand what I'm saying?
Right. And I don't think we don't want all those.
Probably we don't. I mean, it's kind of like the musical instrument thing. do we want in violin as a musical instrument? Do we want to know the what am I saying? Do we want to know the name of that as a sound type from the entity for a violin? And the answer is we do want to know that. That's a useful property. Does that make sense? Shadi, you know what I'm talking about.
Yep, that makes sense. And I was thinking about this one as well. I think it would be nice if some properties are added to these format entities based on what we know and have in our system, but not necessarily restrict to that. If there are extensions that we don't support or MIME types that we don't list, but we know that exist out in the world.
Right. So we just have to say, Wolfram language name, basically, as a property here.
Yes.
And I know we've done that for characters, so I think we have a standard for doing that. Okay, so that's a thing, and that might be useful for effectively documenting. That might be a useful way to have a programmatic way to get to documentation for some of these things, if that makes sense. See what I'm saying? If there are multiple, I don't know, method settings for some quality, something or other, we might be able to put that in here. Right, so that if you have a program that's trying to loop over, like we have a program that's trying to loop over musical instruments, which is driving me crazy that we don't have that. I've scraped that documentation 10 times by now. Shadi.
We'll get to it. Not 13. We'll get to it.
I understand. I mean, just put it in the data repository. I've said that 500 times. Just put that list in the data repository. It's a small thing. I mean, and any other of these ones where it's sort of an arbitrary tiny list of possibilities, just put it in the data repository. And that way it's at least programmatically accessible, and reference that from the page.
Okay.
Okay, so I think we're coming to a conclusion here. I think we want some kind of dollar file extension rules, which is the ultimate setting of, and I don't know exactly how that should. What's that?
Can you evaluate the second thing that Sean said in chat?
Yep.
Right. So, I mean, why don't we just make this a system symbol, and then if people want to reorder it? I mean, we need a name, a better name than dollar internal extensions mapping all caps. But
now, since you suggested the file format properties bracket should return everything, can it return an association for all comma whatever property, as well as a list of formats comma property? And then this is going to be just a special case of that and not a separate function or variable.
Well, no, because the left-hand side of those things is a format name, not a.
Right. I mean, this is the inverse map.
Inverse of that. Okay.
Right. And what this is doing, if you look at XML there, it's giving the priority order, and that's correct, what it's doing there. Now, there are two possibilities. You could also have, if in this list, you could have a star.xml that occurs earlier. And by the way, do we really need the star dot? I don't think we need it. There's no case where it isn't star dot. That ship has sailed.
That's just so that it can be used as a pattern match, right?
I know
you
that.
can directly use string match queue.
I think it'd be better to just have because we have ways to get file extensions from things. I don't know. I think it's cleaner to just have the extension. arrow, whatever.
I would internally have to insert that asterisk in a lot of places. I'd much rather leave it as is, and I don't think that it looks that ugly, but if you insist...
No. Will you stop trying to use implementation arguments? No, it doesn't make any difference that you have to insert the star. You can have this exact same variable that you compute at startup time from whatever the other thing is.
But I also think that by the time that a user wants to use this, they're just going to have to insert that star.
Well, that could be. That's an argument for having that, but that's a different argument.
Yeah, I understand that.
Okay, but
maybe Sean and Shadi and I should have sort of a separate discussion about and the name and exactly what it should be.
But I think this concept, the only thing that I'm concerned about is that it should be easy to change something in here. And right now it isn't easy. If it's just a big long list, you have to go in and do all kinds of, you could prepend something, I suppose, to the list easily enough, but that's kind of yucky. It's very controllable what you have, and it's very easy to understand what you've got here.
And both directions are important too, right? File format properties will still give you the reverse of this thing. If you ask for one format, it'll tell you all the extensions that match to it.
Oh, sure, but that's different. Well, so that means that this is being ingested by the file format properties. This is source material for file format properties that it will then go and give you the reverse. Correct. Look at that weird one. .NET is Pajak. Really? Really? What is Pajak anyway? That seems very iffy.
Does anybody here know what Pajak is? Because I
Well, look at this. Look at this. Tie plus. I don't even know what half this is. Is video format a thing? Video format isn't a thing. What do you mean video format? You can't just say video format, can you? You can't say import comma video format, can you?
Yes, you can.
Okay, fine. So that's a class basically.
It's a catch-all for a bunch of other encoders.
Not just encoders, containers as well. There are so many extensions and containers for video formats that we didn't individually register.
Okay.
This is,
all right.
Yeah.
All right. So there's some iteration on this. Let's go on to our next item for the main meeting, if we can, unless there's more on this right now. I think Itai has proposed that you guys look at it, and I agree with that.
Okay.
Thank you very much, guys. All right, on to the
Thanks.
next item. Polyhedron. This email is all I know about this topic. Why doesn't polyhedron of... Yeah, I know that. Is Charles here?
Yes. Well,
okay.
No, first at the time there was in the original email, you first did the, spiky of region and it fails. So that was that was an issue we fixed. Right.
Well, wait. Does this work or not?
Yes.
Okay.
But in your original example, you use not mesh region, you use region. And it was
let's try it. Let's try it. We take this, we put a region around it.
No. Okay. But you can also use it as a property of the entity. So those two cases.
To make a region?
Yes.
Okay, well, this is fine. But why is it the case when we have polyhedron? Is there any good reason why we don't do the courtesy of having this just work?
Yes, so that was one thing we discussed at the time is, we don't have per se precedence for that on those graphic primitive. We don't do that for line, for polygon.
What will we do for, well, okay, for polygon.
So you're right, polyhedron is a non-evaluating thing, I think, right?
Well, most of the graphic primitive, we don't evaluate them in principle for
I know, but I think we probably should start doing so for canonicalization purposes. I mean, if this can canonicalize to a dodecahedron, could it canonicalize to a dodecahedron, or is that hopeless?
No, it's possible. I mean, we do that for geometry. We pretty much run a canonicalization behind the scene.
Okay.
But if you actually feed it into some geometric function,
we'll just make it auto-evaluate, right?
Yes, that's right. I think it should work.
I don't think this should work, right? I mean, this.
Well, it's got to produce a message. I think it should work. People want. How do you do this otherwise? You have to mess around. What do you actually do to get a polyhedron that is a spiky? What do you do? Tell me what the code is.
Well, isn't I mean, don't
you already lost the game.
Right,
nobody knows
what. An example right above of
no.
region of
No, that's a region. That's not a polyhedron. Is it, Charles?
Yeah, so that's a region. So if you actually want to mean the graphic primitive, then you have to, query the property.
But not just a graphic primitive. I can do many things with this polyhedron. I could say, I could get its volume and things, right? I can use it as a geometric primitive, right?
Right. So equivalent to, the actual symbol dodecahedron, right? Yep.
I know. This should work, guys. This should work. It's just obnoxious to make it not work.
Will be best.
It's just obnoxious because you expect this polyhedron, just like I can say rectangle, right? And I can say area of the rectangle, right?
Well, yeah.
That's going to work. Okay, so similarly here, it's a graphics primitive, so it doesn't evaluate.
Well, that's right. Well, rectangle doesn't change, right? Rectangle doesn't auto-evaluate.
It doesn't happen to change, but this works.
Well, it actually evaluates inside, right? It gives you the canonic, the 0.00 and such. We actually do that. It's something we have been.
Oh, look at that! Fancy that.
So, I mean, it's doable. We have done that in other cases.
I think this is an open and shut case. I think this should evaluate. It's not going to be difficult to do it.
I don't even know what that means. What's a one argument rectangle?
It's a default sized rectangle.
The same has both.
Oh, rectangle doesn't take sizes. It takes a lower left corner and an upper right.
Let's look at the documentation.
It's 1, canonical. So it's the square.
Unit square in the bottom left hand corner.
I see.
Our code would probably look nicer in some cases if we had a thing called unit square, which is that. But it's not too bad. Okay, I think this is an open and shut case. I think it's just a piece of user courtesy. We've already crossed that bridge of doing some evaluation there. I think it should just work. Charles, any further objections?
No.
Okay, next item. Okay. Nest graph, right. So you understand the issue.
I understand the issue. I don't understand what that output gives, because it just seems completely what that input gives as output, which you can evaluate or just open the cell, because that seems completely bizarre to me.
Okay, so first to fix the issue, so first there is a bug, right? In Nest graph, we actually in several other functions of the listability of edges.
Is that just a bug? The fact that nest graph, when nest graphs function, returns things with lists in it. Nest graph, I see, it's a catenate versus flatten type bug. Is that correct?
Right. So if you replace the list there of t, 5 by a wrapper f, you will actually see the correct behavior. So.
So okay. So if you give it an explicit list, right, it's documented to take those as starting points, as individual starting points and union them. But here I've created a graph whose starting value, right, whose one vertex is the list, and then when it iterates on it, it splits it up and.
Right, I think there's multiple bugs here. So let me try and define what I think the bugs are. Okay, let's forget the starting point for a second. If the nodes should be labeled by lists, it doesn't handle that correctly, right? Because what it sees is, it sees a nested list. Okay, nest graph requires that the function f in its first argument return a list of values, correct? Charles, is that correct?
No. The singleton, and if it sees a list, it interprets those as multiple
No. Did you hear what I said? I said nest graph, that its function f at the beginning. Forget the initialization for a minute.
No, and that's what I was responding to. Each one of the, if there's a list returned, it's interpreting them. Which
yes, that's right, but it isn't doing it correctly. I mean, I'll show you an example. Okay, let me show you an example. Pull one up here. Here's a good example.
So this issue, we discussed it already, right?
No. Let's go through this issue, okay?
Okay.
I've got nodes here that are labeled by lists, okay?
Yes.
And what should happen to nest graph, I would assume, is that what's happening here, is this, first question, Charles, is this just a bug, or do we have to talk about it?
It's just a bug.
Well,
okay, then fix it.
Yeah, we discussed that last time. It is in the plan. It's
wait a second. Is it a hard bug to fix? Because I need to see this bug fixed. I've got tons of code that requires this bug to be fixed. I mean, right now I'm hacking around this bug.
No, it's one of those that we just have to go to all the 200 function and check everyone and make sure everything works correctly. It's
okay,
not
fine.
Okay. Hard to
but
fix.
You will get it done for 13 for sure.
Yes, we hope. Yep.
No, for sure. Do I have to chase it?
Okay, it will be done for 30 for sure.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so that's the first point. That was just a bug. Now there's the initialization. And the question of whether, if there are multiple initialization points, how does it know the difference between a single initialization point that is a list and multiple initialization points that are non-lists? Is that correct?
Right. So,
and I thought that just putting an extra list around it would, say, oh, this is a singleton list,
no,
but that didn't do anything.
That's again due to the bug.
Right? Okay, fine.
That's why you've had that behavior.
Okay, but I think we've got a solution here. Go ahead.
I said normally it should behave correctly, like it's documented. I think it's the second usage in the documentation where it's explicitly say if you give a list of expression, we iterate through them. So it's
right. So so this is just a bug.
It's a bug.
Okay, fine. So let's just make sure that we give an example so people can see that if you want to feed in a pair, for example, as the initialization, a single pair as the initialization, that you do that by wrapping it in an additional level of a list.
Yes.
Okay. All right. So let me address one more thing, which I'm not sure I necessarily believe in. Okay. Which is the infinite nest graph. Nest graph is, I don't quite understand this. Is that an infinite nest? Does nest graph with 2 arguments actually do the infinite nest graph?
No, it does a single step.
I see. Okay, this is probably correct. My only question is that I've wanted nest graph, fixed nest graph, fixed point graph, so to speak. And obviously I can get it by saying n is 10 to the 10 or something, but that just seems a bit silly. Should we allow nest graph with infinity there?
Right. So Ian made some point in the thread since I created this agenda that I guess nest tree does this.
So nest tree, nest while, and nest while list all support infinity.
Yeah, well, except I don't, right, well, I guess I don't necessarily buy nest while as precedence, right? Because the whole point of nest while is that it has a condition.
Yeah, nest while is not a precedent, but nest tree certainly is a precedent.
Well, I made the other comment that nest tree is kind of following nest while your proposal for nest graph to me sounds like it's more along the lines of fixed point.
Why is nest tree? I thought nest tree would just...
Nest tree doesn't need a test because you can indicate the test failing just by returning an empty list.
But by returning an empty list, because there is no there's no branch.
It's because in nest tree, you're only growing out the leaves. You're not like transforming the tree as a whole. Whereas in nest graph, you're transforming the graph as a whole until you reach a fixed point.
Right. So nest tree, right, it always wants a list.
Excuse me. It's the same thing, because nest graph keeps going until its F returns a null list every time, which is the same thing as the excavation.
No, it goes.
No.
F returns only vertices that are already present. It's not
okay.
Right,
but hold on.
So which is, Stephen, that's the bullet point I have here. Nest tree, you can't return a scalar. You have to return a list, which is the number of children to create. If you create 0 children, there's nothing to create, and so it will stop at that point. That's why he's saying it's sort of like a built-in nest while.
Okay, hold on. Let me give my argument. Okay, so my claim is, okay, nest tree with an infinity there, as I understand it, recurses down the tree until it reaches the end of the tree. True statement? Or am I completely full of it? No, I'm completely full of it. What is the termination condition for nest tree with infinity?
It's that
you either hit the maximum or everything returns empty.
It's that every leaf returns an empty list.
Okay, fine. Then my argument is absolutely correct. Okay, so in nest tree, the termination is there are no more leaves, right? There's a null list of subsequent leaves returned. Okay, so I'm claiming one termination condition for nest graph is the function f returns a null list.
Yeah, that is sufficient.
Right. Now,
well, what the nest? No, that's. I mean,
okay.
A null list, it can be a vertex. I mean, there is no.
What are you talking about? If nest graph, the f in nest graph always returns a list of new vertices, right?
No, it doesn't. It returns.
No, it returns a vertex. It's not a list of vertex. It just evaluates to something.
Right.
No.
Right.
So look at the first example on nest graph. There are no lists there.
Right. And that's why you don't have per se. If you put infinity, I mean, you get to an infinite graph. You cannot really per se hit that loop.
Wait a second. Nest graph. I see. It's adding an edge.
It creates, right? It looks at the new expression. It sees if that's already an existing vertex.
And then it terminates.
Well, yeah, it could.
Well, per se, it's the number of iteration which terminated. There is no, termination clause explicitly in the nest graph.
But there is, Charles, because I mean, if you look at, I can show you examples where it correctly terminates. I give 10 to the 10 as its third argument, and it terminates. Why does it terminate? It terminates because
you are actually generating duplicate, and we can guess that, right? But if you look at the first example where you just have fx.
No, I get it. Where it never generates a duplicate. But
exactly.
Were this to be, for example, let's say I did nest graph of mod, hash plus 1, 7, for example, here, started off with 1 and do it 4 times, let's say, with vertex label goes to automatic. Okay, great. I have that. Now let's go ahead and do this 8 times. Okay, so now if I do this 1,000,000 times, I still get the same thing.
Right, but it was slower. I think you've actually generated.
Yeah, it was slower.
Right, I think it generated and just at the end the graph deleted the duplicates, or you have multi-edges.
Right.
I'm surprised because I was doing something yesterday where I put 10 to the 10 in there and it was blindingly fast. So I don't think it was generating more. So why was that? So what nest graph is doing is, presumably, it's looking, I assume the algorithm is, it looks at every node it has right now. And if it's told to do another iteration, it looks at every node and it says, can I add something to that node? No, is that right? What is it doing? It's doing, what is it doing? It's looking at nodes that don't have an out degree, that don't have any outgoing edge.
In principle, no. It's just pretty much a one-liner. You iterate to generate the next vertex, and then he link it to the existing one. It doesn't do anything smart.
Well, it should. It should.
Well, you can always fall in that category. We can do something smart, and the trivial case will be slower.
No. I'm saying, well, it obviously is doing something not completely stupid, because I gave 10 to the 10 there and it was still blindingly fast.
Well, it's the code we wrote, right? It's fast. It should be in principle, but it's...
No, there's no way it went through 10 to the 10 iterations. No way, not a chance.
Well, okay. Well, I don't know if you had something cache, but if I change, in your example, 8 to 10 to the 6, it takes 5 seconds.
Okay, well, I think this is something that's worth thinking about the optimization of. I mean, maybe if the thing has side effects.
The case for infinity.
What?
But what infinity mean? To optimize the case of infinity, you need to know the input, the function, right? So now you have to guess in the case where, the function f there, if I know it's periodic.
No, excuse me. Listen.
You didn't get any new vertices in that step, and then you stop.
Yeah, right. It's straightforward. Because what this is doing is saying, this is adding edges based on that function. This is basically showing the mapping, right? That function defines a mapping from vertices to successor vertices. If every vertex has a successor, you're done.
But you remember that was the main key issue, is that there may be a state in that function. You don't know the behavior of the function.
Well,
right?
okay, you're saying the function can have side effects.
Exactly.
Well, maybe it needs a method option about the case where it doesn't have side effects. And in some subsequent time, when we can compile this, it will know if it has side effects. Do you see what I'm saying?
Yes. Yeah. Implementation-wise, yeah, we can take care of it somehow when we do compiler or later on. Yep.
Nick on live stream is saying fixed point should have an operator form, and I guess I agree with that. Why doesn't it? Kind of nice to have that. I think we should have that. I don't see any reason not to. Makes sense, guys?
We'll work it down. Yeah.
Yeah,
we can take care of that.
I think that makes sense. I don't see an obvious issue with that.
Okay, so I'm proposing some kind of method option for nest graph, but the main thing I want is the bug fixed. Okay, I'm recanting a little bit on the infinity, but it would be nice to have, if you put infinity there, you could assume no side effects, because clearly with side effects, it's never going to work.
Okay, Charles, you might have, so even though you're not listed, you might have some interest in this next item. But
we can work for the infinity and figure out something for sure.
Okay, fine. Put in infinity for assume no side effects, and then work backwards from that.
Okay.
I'm gonna have to go in a second here, but
so this one I think is pretty quick. The next one will take longer, so we can save it for next time.
Okay.
Right, so basically I was fixing a bug and I discovered almost working code that Tom wrote back in 1994 for doing summations with non-unit increments. And so
You mean, how is that? But how do I enter that?
So you you do it in the normal way, and just the lower limit is a 1x2 matrix.
Oh, it is. It's not an underscript.
It's not an underscript. I could change it to be an underscript, but right now Tom's implementation was a grid box, so I kept it as a grid box. But since it's never worked or been documented,
What do you mean by it never worked? I mean, what do you mean it's implemented but it never worked?
The code that Tom wrote in 1994 never worked. I discovered this code while fixing a bug, and so while I was in the branch where I fixed the bug.
So it's not a bug related to this. It's a bug related to something completely different.
Right. Yeah. I mean, it's related to some, but it was by import of text sums as opposed to this. And so when I was fixing that unrelated bug and discovered this code. And so now in my local branch, this now works. And so should we document it? Should we change it to be an underscript rather than a grid box?
Well, I'm not an expert in what people out in the world of discrete math have done in the last however many decades for this issue. Who knows that?
Charles, you might know.
You mean in terms of typesetting, or you mean
yes,
in terms of
Right.
typesetting?
So
how would you write a sum? I mean, I think somebody might write k equals 1, 3, 5, ... and then a 9 at the top, or something. I don't know what they'd write. What would they write? I mean, this is a question. I'm sure Don Knuth has gotten a version of this somewhere.
But really, on top of my mind, I don't think I've seen anyone with an iterator in general.
Okay.
I mean, I certainly have seen like the delta K thing, but maybe it's more common with commas rather than.
But the delta K is the difference delta, right?
Yes, that is difference delta there.
Right. So it's
right. So
you already use it
right.
as a typeset for difference delta. So
I think this is a more. I think what we need to address this is somebody needs to do a bit of a survey of what people have done out there in the world to typeset these kinds of things.
Okay.
And I mean, I'm not jumping up and down with urgency, unlike the bug in nest graph where I am jumping up and down with urgency. But this thing is, it's kind of cool that the code archaeology reveals something like this. But we don't necessarily have to, open a luxury hotel in those ruins type thing.
Okay.
I mean, I don't know.
Right. I mean, right. I mean, right. It was basically the sort of thing that I was, making, I had to replace one function with a different function. And so I had to understand the code in order to know whether or not to replace it. And once I understood what the code was doing, it took me like 2 minutes to actually fix it.
Right. Well, fine. Let's just do the inventory, see what we conclude, see if there's something reasonable we can do here. And I mean, it might be nice as a way of outputting something with a non, with a step for the sum, having an output form for that might be something good.
Mm-hmm.
All right, I should wrap up here.
Okay.
Thanks all, and thanks to folks on the live stream. And oh, Ethan is saying add it to product as well. Well, tell us examples of where you've seen it used. That's the main thing. And whether we like the notation really.
What can you elaborate on what he's saying?
Just says add it to the product. Product as in the product, not the product as in our software product, but the product as in the function product.
Ah, okay.
At least that's what I assumed. With a product with a capital P. Okay, see you guys soon.